Simon & Schuster Audioworks presents Star Trek: The Next Generation. Contamination by John Vornholt. This program was read by Michael Dorn.
Security log, stardate 44261.3. Lieutenant Worf reporting. It now appears that I should have taken more interest in the microcontamination project under the direction of Drs. Emil and Len Costa. Important laboratory notes have been destroyed and vital information may be lost forever. The Costa's superior, Dr. Karn Malou, has confirmed that Dr. Len Costa has erased wholesale banks of computer records. Given the esteemed reputation of the Costas, this serious breach of security was totally unexpected. Among many other achievements, the Costas perfected the biofilter, which identifies and removes contaminants during transporter operations. They are not just husband and wife, but science's most famous ongoing collaboration. In view of their many contributions to the Federation, we are proceeding cautiously in our investigations. According to Dr. Malou, Len Costa had recently exhibited other moments of irrational behavior, but nothing of this magnitude. Captain Picard has ordered Counselor Troy to perform a thorough psychological examination of Dr. Len Costa. At this point, I am only certain of one thing. Erasure of the files was not a sudden impulse, but an act of premeditated sabotage. Len Costa looked more like a disheveled, hyperactive child than a woman nearing 80 years of age. Deanna Troi could hardly imagine that this was the person, along with her husband Emil, who had spearheaded the microcontamination project for so many years. Uncertainty, anger, confusion, pain. The salvo of emotions struck Deanna with such force that she nearly recoiled. Len Costa clawed both hands through brambles of red and silver-streaked hair, then tugged violently at the hem of her blue tunic. Her thin shoulders, hunched from too many hours bent over a lab bench, shook with rage.
I'm very uncomfortable being here. How dares a doctor order me to report to you?
Dr. Malou had no choice after you admitted to destroying records. Wouldn't you like to take a moment to explain why you did that?
They were my records, from my project.
You're a betazoid.
Why don't you read my mind like Dr. Malou?
I'm not a full-blooded betazoid like Dr. Malou. And even he can't read minds. Only communicate telepathically.
Who cares? A 2-year-old could read my mind. I want off of this ship. I can't stand it here any longer.
Deanna sighed, wondering how much more of this she could stand. Sit down, Dr. Costa, and be quiet. Miraculously, the scientist sunk into her chair and stared at the younger woman. Her disjointed stare lasted only seconds before she buried her face within trembling hands and sobbed. He's leaving me. Who's leaving you? Emil. Instinctively, the counselor reached out for the distraught researcher and caught her in her arms. Deanna was not a large person, but Len Costa felt as small and helpless as a wounded sparrow in her embrace. There, you are among friends. It's always been work, not friends. A galaxy full of microcontaminants to categorize, isolate, and learn to avoid. I thought coming to the Enterprise would be the crowning achievement of our careers. But instead, it has been our downfall. With wraith-like hands, Dr. Costa gripped Deanna's tunic and held on desperately. Whatever it takes, Counselor, you must get us off this ship before... Before what? What are you afraid of? As if she had said too much, Len Costa suddenly pulled away from the counselor and backed toward the door. Can we finish tomorrow, Counselor? Deanna sighed. It was almost midnight, and the counselor thought they might both do better with some sleep. Certainly, Dr. Costa. but first thing tomorrow. The wild-eyed and wild-haired image of Lynn Costa didn't go away easily, but at last Deanna welcomed sleep. She was troubled by a disturbing yet fascinating dream in which she was completely enclosed in a white suit and white helmet. Her labored breathing echoed in her ears, and the stale scent of reconstituted air assaulted her nostrils. Sweat beaded upon her brow and the back of her neck, and she fought off feelings of claustrophobia. She was in a sterile white room with a row of oblong pods, each just barely large enough to seal a human within. Through gray-tinted glass, she could see a mass of miniaturized equipment within each pod: beakers, tubes, and sensors. The pods were familiar, yet also vaguely threatening. She was drawn to the closest pod. She knew instinctively something was wrong with it. As she peered into the smoky glass, a stream of yellow gas seeped from a valve on the outside of the pod. The stream became a flood, and noxious fumes invaded her eyes, nose, and mouth. Delicate membranes burned with searing pain, and she gagged uncontrollably. The suit was never intended to keep surrounding air out, and the yellow gas poured in. She struggled to stay on her feet, but the battle was already over. She was dying. Deanna bolted upright in her bed, panting for breath. Her hair clung to her sweat-drenched neck and shoulders. She swept her hand over the panel beside her bed, and the lights came on full. She staggered out of bed and rushed to the food slot, where she punched up a large glass of water. She gulped it ravenously, trying to erase the dry burning in her throat.
Crusher to Troy. Are you awake, Deanna?
Troy here. Yes, Beverly, I'm very much awake.
I'm sorry to interrupt you during your sleep period, but it's about Dr. Lynn Costa.
Profound dread welled within Deanna's soul. What about Dr. Costa? Did you read my log?
Can you please come to sickbay? Lynn Costa is dead.
Security log, stardate 44261.8. Lieutenant Worf reporting. At approximately 02:15 hours, the body of Dr. Lynn Costa was discovered in the laboratory of the Microcontamination Project on Deck 31. Dr. Crusher estimates that Lynn Costa died almost immediately from an unexpected discharge of toxic gas. The gas is of an unknown content, but according to Dr. Grastow, Lynn Costa was working on a highly theoretical experiment in reactive purification. That is, the conversion of solid contaminants to a gaseous state for easier removal. She conducted her experiment alone, during off hours in a Class 0 pod, because she knew it could be dangerous. We suspect there was a rupture in a valve or seal. Dr. Costa was wearing a standard cleanroom suit and helmet, which only filter air flowing out, not in. Due to negative pressure, the Class 1 cleanroom where the accident occurred is self-sealing. Ship's monitors indicate full containment of the gas and no danger to any other member of the crew. The filtration system is currently purging the cleanroom of the gas. According to Counselor Troy, Lynn Costa was depressed and distraught over a failing marriage, and we cannot rule out the possibility of suicide. To my thinking, the only possible reason for suicide would be cowardice in battle. But then, I am not human. Captain Picard and Counselor Troy went to inform Emil Costa of his wife's death, and found him mildly intoxicated. Apparently, against ship's regulations, he had been drinking laboratory-grade alcohol. These events are sufficiently troubling to Captain Picard that he has asked Counselor Troy and myself to investigate. Deck 5. Counselor, are humans really so susceptible to depression that they would take their own lives?
I'm afraid so, Worf. They have a long history of obsession with death. I believe it stems from their early religions, in which the afterlife is portrayed as being preferable to real life. The turbolift deposited Deanna and Worf on Deck 5, where they were to conduct their first interview of the day with Karn Malou, the Costas superior. They strode out to find a thin male Vulcan waiting for them. "I am Sadek. I work on the micro-contamination project, and I will show you where Dr. Costa's body was found. But first, Dr. Malou would like to speak briefly with you." Worf liked dealing with Vulcans. You could speak frankly to them and not waste time being tactful, as you had to with humans. They followed the pointy-eared humanoid to a rather sumptuous office by Enterprise standards. The captain's ready room paled by comparison. The walls were festooned with sculpted glass cases which contained mounted insects from all over the galaxy. Each case was a handcrafted work of art on its own merit. The various preserved creatures ranged from earth scorpions, curled to strike, to centaurian water beetles with multiple webbed heads. Dominating the cabin was a massive amber desk, a hunk of petrified resin in which thousands of betazoidan grubs were forever frozen. At first glance, the noted entomologist and administrator Karn Malou was less prepossessing than his office. He was short, squat, and possessed of dense eyebrows which curled back into a kinky mass of gray hair. "Welcome, Counselor. Lieutenant, I wish your visit here could be under more pleasant circumstances." Worf nodded. "Nice office." Deanna leaned forward expectantly. "Dr. Malou, what do you think happened to Len Costa?" "I have no idea. I was as surprised as anyone. I have always given the Costas complete autonomy on their projects, and they certainly don't need my guidance. I can't imagine what happened down there." Deanna looked puzzled. "But Dr. Malou, you were the one who alerted me to Len Costa's mental condition." "True, Counselor, but I was following Starfleet regulations, nothing more. Willful destruction of official records is a serious breach of security. We never got a good explanation out of her." Worf looked frustrated. "Who might know something, Doctor?" Karn Malou motioned to the quiet Vulcan. "Dr. Sadek has been with the micro-contamination project longer than anyone, except the Costas. You should also talk to the junior assistants, Grastow and the Earth Girl, Shauna Russell. Those are the only people who came into contact with the Costas on a regular basis. Of course, you will want to talk to Emil." Worf nodded. "First, we want to see the clean room." Working on Deck 31 bestowed a certain mystique among the scientific community. It and its residential decks, 32 and 33, were sandwiched between deuterium reactors above and a mass of environmental support equipment below. This restricted location made Deck 31 highly secure and the logical choice for any sort of experiments that were dangerous or classified. Sadek led Deanna and Worf into a circular room with racks of white cleanroom garments. The floor under their feet became a silver grating through which air flowed easily. The Vulcan noticed their discomfort. "Your first air shower. There will be others, as well as an ultraviolet bath. The suits are light, and you may wear them over your clothing." Deanna Troi selected a garment from the racks. "Are all these rooms negative pressurized?" "It depends. Biomedical labs are usually negative pressurized, so that airborne particles cannot escape. On the other hand, the transition rooms are positive pressurized, so that dirtier air cannot come in. Air pressure is our greatest ally in keeping the environment clean." Even through the suit and helmet, Deanna felt the rapid rush of air over her body as they entered the turbolift. Quartz tubes throbbed over her head and under the white booties covering her feet. They entered a vast room with smaller self-enclosed clean rooms dotting its surface, like igloos on an Antarctic plain. Deanna moved to the large window overlooking the Class 1 clean room. It was exactly as she had remembered it from her dream. The white sterility, the row of ominous gray tinted pods, and the miniature lab equipment and sensors within each pod. Suddenly, the sense of déjà vu overwhelmed her, and she gripped the window ledge for support. Worf rushed to her side.
Counselor, are you all right?
Yes, I'm fine. Dr. Sadok, is it safe for us to enter? Yes. Levels are normal. Particle count is 0.62. Lethal gas analysis is negative. Relative pressure is at a negative 12%, and pod number 1 has been deactivated. The white room was featureless except for the window and the pods. Deanna counted 8 of them, all identical except for the identification screens built into their heavily sealed hatches. Some of the screens were dark, but others bore electronic descriptions like Betelgeuse 3, ionized atmosphere, Udrixyl compound process refinement, and space vacuum, hold for Grastow. They approached pod number 1. Its screen was dark. Worf studied the enclosure for a moment, then turned on a dust-free tricorder Sadok had furnished him. Worf moved the instrument along the smooth shell.
Dr. Sadok, please help me check the integrity of the seals.
I shall. The regulator valve appears intact. Reluctantly, Deanna edged closer to the gray enclosure. Dr. Sadok, can the pressure flow both ways through the valve? Could the gas have escaped from there? The Vulcan shook his head. Highly unlikely. Experiments with any sort of risk factor are automatically conducted under negative pressure. Additionally, the valve is computer-controlled and would not be tripped with dangerous gases present. However, the pods have their own computer subsystems. If the regulator valve is at fault, it is easy to prove. Computer? Awaiting instructions, Dr. Sadok. Reactivate pod number 1 and run containment diagnostics with full simulation. Running diagnostics. Almost immediately, the gray interior of the pod became darker and dingier, and messages and codes began to flash on its screen. Incorrect air pressure readings. Within seconds, red smoke began streaming from the regulator valve. Deanna recoiled in fright, but Sadok grabbed her arm with a surprisingly firm grip. It's harmless, but it's also unexpected and inexplicable. Worf was measuring the crimson stream with his tricorder.
This flow is more than enough to overcome someone in seconds. Plus, Lynn Costa would not have expected the gas to be so lethal.
Or did she, wondered Deanna. Looking nervously away from the escaping red gas, she glanced down at the floor and saw a small blue vial. In this bastion of cleanliness, the haphazardly discarded object seemed almost shocking. Deanna reached down with a gloved hand to pick it up. Sadok turned to Worf and Troy. It is clearly apparent that the valve is not intact. For a malfunction of this magnitude, 2 things had to occur. First, the pod's programming was altered to give a negative reading when the pressure inside the pod was actually positive. Secondly, the valve failed when the pressure differential became too great. Such catastrophic failure is impossible without substantial alteration. Worf leaned forward.
Are you saying that both the valve and the programming were altered?
Yes, Lieutenant. Lynn Costa's death was no accident. Someone killed her. Captain Jean-Luc Picard paced the length of his ready room, shaking his head in disbelief.
Murdered? Are you absolutely certain, Lieutenant? No, Captain. Not until we verify what Dr. Sadok told us. Commander LaForge has assembled a team of programmers and engineers to inspect every aspect of that pod. Sadok could conceivably be mistaken. Or lying.
Deanna Troy shook her head. A Vulcan who lied so brazenly would be considered quite insane. I doubt if I could tell whether Sadok is lying or not. He has an extremely strong and guarded intellect. Captain Picard just shook his head in disbelief.
We can't start thinking about suspects until we've exhausted every other possibility. Use whatever facilities or personnel you need, Lieutenant. I trust you to be thorough. Captain, if there is a murderer on board, I will find him.
Picard nodded, then turned to his trusted counselor.
Deanna, I hate forcing you to be a sort of lie detector, but we haven't got any alternative. Can you accompany the lieutenant when he interrogates the others?
Yes, sir. I feel that if I had taken Lynn Costa's fear more seriously, I might have prevented her death. Naturally, I want very much to find out what happened to her.
Make it so.
Lieutenant Worf and Counselor Troy stepped into the turbolip. Deanna eyed the tall humanoid beside her. Worf appeared calm, but his jaw was working furiously.
Deck 32. Worf to LaForge. Did you find anything?
Geordi here. Sorry, Worf, but so far we haven't found anything conclusive. Somebody could have changed the programming on that pod by altering just a few bytes in the monitoring system. They didn't go through the main computer, so maybe they used a debugger. Apparently, Lynn Costa didn't keep a programming log.
What about the pod?
It seems to be in perfect working order, except for that valve you gave me. The calibration of the O-rings was off just enough to let the pressurized gas escape. Whoever altered those rings knew exactly what they were doing, but I'm not so sure you could prove it. Working down in this place, you don't leave many traces.
Then I assume you don't need us to come down there.
Nope. We'll stay here and poke through everything until we're satisfied there's nothing left to learn. Out. Deanna Troi led the Klingon down the corridors of Deck 32. She knew the way, having visited the doctor earlier with Captain Picard. As they neared his quarters, she remembered the scientist's slurred speech, disheveled appearance, and alcohol-tainted breath. At the door of his cabin, a somber and sober Emil Costa greeted them. He looked far more gray and bent than Deanna remembered. His eyes, usually defiant and arrogant, were now wary and haunted. The counselor recalled seeing the same haunted look in his wife's eyes.
Hello. I've been expecting you to. Please, come in. Would you like something from the food slot? Worf shook his head. No, Doctor. What would be your reaction if I told you your wife was murdered?
The breath escaped from Emil Costa, and he seemed to shrink deeper into the big chair. Nevertheless, thought Deanna, he didn't exhibit any of the shock at the idea that everyone else had. Worf pressed on.
Is it possible your wife committed suicide?
No. She would never do that. She was looking forward to getting off the ship. Distractedly, Emil stood and shambled over to the Bavarian cuckoo clock hanging on the wall. Gently, he reset the hands of the antiquated timepiece. You know, Lieutenant, some people think we didn't get along because we had an adversarial relationship. It was my job to come up with the microbes and contaminants needed to test my wife's procedures. I am not proud of everything I had done in my life, but I had never regretted marrying Lynn. Deanna Troi leaned forward. Dr. Costa, we understand that Lynn destroyed certain computer files, mostly records of your microbe discoveries. Why did she destroy those files? There's nothing else I can tell you. If you will please leave me now, I have to send a message to Starfleet.
We may need to question you again.
You know where to find me. I have resigned from the micro-contamination project, and I will restrict myself to these quarters. Once they were in the hallway, Deanna Troi let out a deep sigh. He's not being truthful, but he seems genuinely remorseful. Worf shrugged.
More than one murderer has regretted his actions afterward. Let us see Grastow next, then Shauna Russell.
They stepped down into the cabin of the massive Antarian, Dr. Grastow. Apparently, thought Deanna, the floor of his cabin had been lowered to accommodate his extraordinary height. Worf led the way into the room.
It was certainly odd to see the Klingon dwarfed in height.
Hello. How may I help you?
In an unaccustomed maneuver, Worf tipped his head back to look directly into the Antarian's eyes. Dr. Grastow, we now believe that Len Costa's death was not accidental. The programming and regulator valve on pod number 1 had been tampered with.
I thought as much, Lieutenant. Do you have any suspects?
Worf was taken aback by Grastow's enthusiasm, and he glanced puzzledly at Deanna. To be blunt, everyone is a suspect, including yourself.
Me? Why would I kill Len Costa? I loved the woman.
Dr. Grastow, please explain what you mean by loved.
Respected, loved, worshipped. On my home planet, we had a terrible infestation of parasitic microorganisms in our soil, and we were literally starving to death. Antarian dietary needs can be quite exacting. The Costas devoted a year of their lives to solving the problem. We never fully eradicated the parasites, but they taught us hydroponic farming under ultra-clean conditions. That was 20 standard years ago, when I was just a lad. But I vowed at that time that I would repay this debt to the Costas. I graduated in the top 2% of my class at the academy, and I passed over several plum assignments to become their assistant. My classmates said I was crazy, but I never regretted my decision. That was 3 years ago.
Then you came to the Enterprise with them.
Oh, yes. Only Sadek had been with him longer. He's the one you should be suspicious of, because he always thought he could run the project better than them. And now he'll have his chance.
Deanna Troi furrowed her luxuriant eyebrows. You seem to know that Emil Costa is leaving the project, whereas we just found out.
Yes. Emil confides in me. But he was planning to leave even before this terrible thing.
Why was their marriage troubled? Did they have professional differences?
To some degree, yes. Lately, Emil has been more successful than ever in developing organisms that confounded Len's equipment. But you would think after 40-odd years, they could put their professional matters aside.
Worf scowled dubiously. Have you anything else to tell us?
No, Lieutenant. Only I'm not looking forward to working under Sadek. Vulcans don't know the meaning of the word rest.
Shauna Russell was not in her cabin or at her workstation. According to the computer, the young laboratory assistant was in the 10 forward room. The lounge was fairly busy when Worf and Deanna entered, and they could barely see the hunched blonde figure at the rear of the room. Shauna stared out of the window at the blurring stars, and she didn't look up from her quiet contemplation until Worf loomed over her. Excuse me, we have to speak with you. Shauna blinked through reddened eyes, and Worf was surprised by her youthfulness and the depth of incomprehension in her eyes. Her yellow hair matched the paleness of her skin and clung to her cheeks, damp with tears. Worf was not a creature given to sympathy, but the distraught condition of this human female softened his manner somewhat. May Counselor Troi and myself sit down? Yes, please. I didn't feel like being alone in my room, so I came here. There wasn't any place else to go. How much do you know about what happened to Len Costa? Since I've been sitting here, I've overheard some people talking. They say it wasn't an accident. Is that true, Lieutenant? Quite possibly. That is why we are talking to the people who had access to the Class 0 pods. Did you have any cause to alter the programming or any of the equipment on that pod? A realization of the intent of the questioning suddenly dawned on the young scientist, and she bolted upright in her chair. You think You're crazy! Shauna Russell sank back into the chair and shook her head sadly. Then she covered her eyes with her hands and sobbed softly. Counselor Troi stood, looked at Worf, and cocked her head toward the exit. Worf nodded. If you think of anything, please contact me.
But Shauna Russell was beyond hearing his words. As he and Deanna Troy wound their way between the empty tables of the 10 forward room, Worf reached into a sash and pulled out the small blue vial.
I wonder if Shauna Russell has seen this vial before.
I have. Worf and Deanna turned to see Guinan watching them from behind her saloon-style countertop. The mysterious proprietor pointed to the vial. Or one just like it. Emil Costa had it with him last night when he came in here. He often carried it to spice up his orange juice.
With alcohol?
I know it's against the regulations, and I shouldn't have let him do it, but he seemed so sad. Slowly, Worf turned to Deanna, and the two of them exchanged looks that confirmed each other's suspicions. After a moment, the Klingon clenched his jaw, pounded his fist on the bar, and stormed out the door. Only by running did Deanna manage to catch up with him. Worf, that's not enough proof. You need more.
I have enough to confront him.
He would just deny it, and then he would know you had this evidence. Wait until you've got more. Let's build a case against him. The Klingon's chest heaved a few more times, but he managed to calm himself.
You are right. We cannot go to Starfleet with a single piece of circumstantial evidence. And we have to discover a motive. Something beyond the stress of marriage. Security log. Stardate 44262.1. Lieutenant Worf reporting. The following is a summary of information discovered by myself and Counselor Troy from the Starfleet records of Emil and Lynn Costa. Early in their careers, the Costas engendered their share of enemies and critics within the scientific community. 33 years ago, they were forced to resign from a research project on Epsilon 4 after quarreling with their superior. However, after they perfected the biofilter, the Costas received support from the highest levels of the Federation. They formed the Micro-Contamination Project, and were given a free hand to pursue whatever research they wanted. They still had their critics and enemies. A woman named Megan Terry sued them for scientific plagiarism, claiming that she perfected the biofilter while all three of them were co-workers. But Megan Terry lost her suit 25 years ago, and she's been dead for 3 years. The Costas performed a number of altruistic acts, such as bringing clean farming and manufacturing to impoverished planets. They never took any payment for any of their discoveries, even assigning the royalties from their patents to a plague relief fund. The Costas had few friends and no discernible hobbies outside of Emil's fondness for cuckoo clocks and alcohol. The Costas were well known for their secrecy. I have also discovered that only the published records of Emil's microbe discoveries are available. Much of the raw data he collected whenever the Enterprise was in orbit around a planet is missing, and so is the testing that was done afterward. This data was destroyed by Lynn Costa. In brief, I believe we are not going to find anything incriminating in the official records. Therefore, I am pursuing other means to reach the truth. Come.
Ensign Wesley Crusher stood nervously in the doorway. The teenager had never been summoned to Worf's private command post before. You sent for me, Lieutenant?
Don't stand in the corridor, Ensign. What I have to say is highly confidential.
Yes, sir?
I see that Emil Costa used to tutor you in microbiology. Do you think you could reestablish your friendly relationship with him? Keep him company.
Right now? His wife just died. The Klingon ground his teeth together for a moment before replying.
I know he is your friend, Ensign, but Emil Costa is the primary suspect in a murder investigation. I wish you to observe him and find out if he killed his wife.
Emil? Kill his wife? I think you got the wrong person, Lieutenant. He adored her. The Klingon rose to his full height and glowered at the boy.
We Klingons have a saying. A terrible secret cannot be kept. He may admit his crime to you if he thinks you are his friend.
But I am his friend.
Not on this assignment. You are an investigator, and you are not to tell anyone. Is that understood?
Yes, sir.
Perhaps your report will clear Emil from suspicion. I will inform Captain Picard, Commander Riker, and Counselor Troy. No one else needs to know. Remember, Ensign, Emil Costa could be a murderer. You must never place yourself in danger. As soon as you uncover any knowledge of his role in Lynn Costa's death, good or bad, I want you to see me. Is that understood?
Yes, sir.
The funeral is in an hour. Perhaps you can offer to go with him. Dismissed.
Wesley felt a sudden pang of guilt for not having kept in closer touch with the Costas, but scheduling time with them was difficult, and his bridge duty, no excuses. He should have kept closer tabs on them.
Wesley, is that you?
Yes, Doctor, it's me. What's the matter? Are you going to let me in? The door opened, and a disheveled Emil Costa gripped Wesley's elbow and dragged him inside. He didn't seem to relax until the door had whooshed safely shut. Are you all right, Doctor? I don't wish to see just anyone at the moment. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected. It still hasn't sunk in yet that she's gone. And maybe it never will, but I have a good portion of my life ahead of me, and I am very anxious to get off the ship. You're leaving the ship? When are you doing that? At the Cave on a Rock. We are to arrive shortly after the funeral. I was just packing. The aged researcher returned to his bed, where he was stuffing toiletries and personal articles into an unassuming duffel bag. He gazed fondly at a small album of holographic photos. Did you ever see pictures of Len when she was young? No. I'd like to see them. Emil opened the book of holographic images, and an incredibly young, lithe, almost girlish figure danced before Wesley's eyes. They were merely photos adorned with a modicum of movement, but the vivacity of the red-haired sprite leapt off the pages. Finally, the old man spoke. We were joined in so many ways. We promised each other it would be a partnership until death. And it was. In that sense, I believe we fulfilled our promise to each other. Although I wish our last months had been happier. His voice trailed away into muffled sobs. Wesley was mortified. He had not meant to open old wounds and cause his tutor pain, but maybe the tears were cleansing, because the old man did not seem the least bit ashamed of them. Wesley put his arm around the widower's hunched shoulders and let him cry. Doctor, do you know what happened to her? No, not really. Wesley, could you please write down the ID number from that cuckoo clock so that I can have it replicated at my next stop? Yes, sir. I took that clock apart and put it back together so often, but it never did keep the correct time. I've always thought it was the artificial gravity on the ship. Those old weights and springs know the difference. Some things are best left where they are. In the captain's ready room, Jean-Luc Picard stared at his screen, reading for the second time Geordi's report about the Class Zero pod on Deck 31. It was still just as inconclusive.
Come.
Lieutenant Worf darkened the doorway.
You sent for me, sir. Yes, Lieutenant, I'll be brief. At the direct order of Starfleet, Emil Costa has been granted permission to disembark at our next destination, Kayron Rock. He is leaving the ship permanently in 4 hours. Captain, we have physical evidence against Emil Costa. A vial discovered on the floor by the pod. Guinan has identified it as being exactly like a vial he was carrying earlier. You may have evidence, but you don't have a crime. I've read Geordi's report, and there's no proof that Lynn Costa's death was anything but an accident. Captain, there is also the conclusion by the Vulcan. Shattuck and his superior, Karn Malou, came to see me. Shattuck has not completely recanted his theory, but he agrees that an accident is a possibility. Dr. Malou feels strongly that it is. Dr. Malou also claims that you are disrupting the work of the entire science branch. I have listened to all the theories, read all the data, and I have looked in vain for a suitable explanation. Then, Captain, I have failed. Nonsense. I assigned this investigation to you and Counselor Troy, and I know you have done all you could. We have to accept the possibility that Lynn Costa's death may be classified as an accident. Captain, grant me the next 4 hours until Emil Costa leaves the ship. I promise that if we haven't got enough material to charge him by then, we will conclude the investigation. Very well, but no longer. With Commander Riker, Data, and myself attending the ceremonies, we need you on the bridge. And we need to get Deck 31 back to normal. Understood, sir. Walk with me to the funeral, Lieutenant.
The theater was crammed to capacity, with every seat filled and people milling in the aisles. The overflow crowd stood outside in the corridor or stopped wherever they were to listen to the service on the ship's intercom. Through a viewport, the stars gently blurred past at Warp 3, but everyone's attention was on the elegant silver casket in the center of the stage. Worf prowled through the crowd, his bony forehead sticking out like a shark's fin over the top of the other heads. The Klingon suddenly felt a tug on his sleeve. He turned to look down at the comely face and figure of Shauna Russell. She gazed up at him with eyes that were a lovely shade of blue, but were a bit too helpless for Worf's taste. Lieutenant Worf, I remembered something.
Yes?
I once heard someone threatening Lynn Costa. Worf nodded.
Her husband?
No. Dr. Karn Malou. They were just coming into the transition room, and I don't think they saw me. But he said something like, if you botch this opportunity, I'll kill you.
What opportunity?
Shauna Russell shrugged. I don't know. That probably isn't helpful, is it? Before Worf could question her further, Captain Picard took the podium, and the services began. After the funeral, Wesley Crusher hurried to catch up with Emil Costa. The older man had bolted midway through the service, but Wesley had politely waited until Lynn Costa's molecules had been beamed into the cosmos. Passing a pair of residents in the corridor, the ensign smiled cordially and slowed his walk to an easy gait, trying not to look suspicious while he scanned the doors for Emil's cabin. The doctor's door opened as he expected, but it wasn't the stooped old scientist who met him. The haircut was the same, but it graced the skull of an Antarian who stood at least a meter taller than the teenager. I'm Ensign Crusher, and I wish to see Dr. Costa.
I am Grastow. Dr. Costa is seeing no one now. He's resting until his departure.
But I was just with Dr. Costa at the funeral. I'm sure he'll want to see me. As Wesley took a step forward, Grastow grabbed him by his jersey and slammed him back against the bulkhead. The air shot out of his lungs, and his head and buttocks stung with the impact. The Antarian released his grip, and Wesley slid down the smooth wall, landing in a wheezing heap on the floor of Deck 32.
By the doctor's direct order, Ensign Crusher, no one is to see him.
I got the message. The Antarian scowled at Wesley. Then the immense body turned and marched back into the Costa quarters. For the next 3 hours, Wesley waited in the corridor. He watched as dozens of people tried to pay their respects to Emil Costa, but no one ever appeared at the door but Grastow, and no one was admitted. Finally, Wesley secured a tricorder and ran a brief scan of Emil's quarters as he strolled by. There was only one life form present, a big one to be sure. If, reasoned Wesley, Grastow was alone in Emil's cabin, maybe the scientist was hiding out in the Antarian's quarters. That was Wesley's next destination.
Dr. Costa, let me in. I know you're in there.
Do you have to yell like that? Get in here! Looking haggard and pale, the microbiologist dragged Wesley into Grastow's quarters. Emil Costa looked closer to 100 than his 80 years of age. The old man dissolved into tears. Wesley swallowed hard and stumbled around the room looking for a chair. He sat, profoundly embarrassed and saddened. Dr. Costa, would you like to talk to someone like Counselor Troy?
No. Don't call any of your friends. As I said, I will end this affair tonight. You must trust me, Wesley, and do nothing to interfere.
The mammoth Antarian Grastow now entered his own quarters. Wesley nearly leapt from his chair, but Grastow hardly paid the ensign any attention as he rushed to Emil Costa's side.
Doctor, are you all right? Yes. You have done well, Grastow, even if our young friend was a bit too clever.
Wesley turned to the doctor. I wish there was something I could do to help you, sir.
There is, Wesley. Please don't attempt to follow me. I want you and Grastow to stay here.
On this subtle command, the huge Antarian wrapped his arms around Wesley and held him tightly in his chair. Wesley's attention was diverted by the sight of Emil Costa taking a phaser weapon from his bedside drawer.
Dr. Costa, where are you going with that?
The doctor smiled wanly.
The pod room. But this is merely a precaution. Goodbye, Wesley.
The ensign reached instinctively for his communicator badge, but Grastow was swift as well as strong. He wrapped a massive fist around the tiny badge and ripped it off Wesley's chest, taking several centimeters of red cloth with it. The ensign glared at Grastow.
Stop! Give me back my communicator.
Without giving it too much thought, Wesley bolted from his chair, giving it a wicked kick. The chair skittered across the deck as Wesley's hands collided with the panel by the bed. He heard an unfamiliar curse when the lights went out. Wes landed between Grastow's legs, which kicked blindly at the teenager, sending him tumbling out of the room. In the corridor of Deck 32, Wesley staggered to his feet, realizing he had only a few seconds to guarantee his escape and continue his mission. He rushed to the nearest comm panel and pounded it furiously.
Ensign Crusher to O'Brien. Come in, Transporter Room 3.
O'Brien here. What can I do for you, lad?
beam me directly from these coordinates to the Class 1 clean room on Deck 31.
Whoa now, lad. You're only one deck away. What's the matter with the turbo lift?
Fire burning in his pink eyes, Grastal lumbered out of the room and headed toward Wesley. Do it now! I'm on a special assignment for warp. It's a matter of life and death.
Whose death?
Mine! Energize! The Antarian's massive arms wrapped around whirling fragments of light. Wesley Crusher himself was gone. The ensign's eyes were still screwed tightly shut, and he could almost feel Grastal's hot breath on his neck. Nevertheless, the slight tingling in his being told him that he had transported. He opened his eyes to find himself alone in the eerie pod room of Deck 31. Wesley borrowed some sterile dust-free gauze from a dispenser and held it over his mouth and nose. He didn't want to set off alarms merely by breathing. Clearly alone, he crouched down behind the farthest pod in the back of the room, safely hidden, to wait for Dr. Costa. A white-suited, helmeted figure entered. It could have been anybody, but Wesley surmised from the pronounced stoop and nervous shuffling that it was Emil Costa. Wesley was almost moved to rise from his hiding place to comfort the old man when the door opened and a stocky figure in a white suit entered. Immediately, the new arrival removed his helmet and wiped a hand over his bristling eyebrows and thick stand of graying hair. Wesley was shocked to see the familiar figure of Dr. Karn Malou. Milou, did you kill her?
Don't be absurd, Emil. It was an accident, considering Lynn's mental state a predictable one. We should have done more to prevent it.
Milou, you can't blame her for not wanting to reveal the origin of the submicrobe. She knew how dangerous it could be. But Emil, she agreed initially. You both did. You can't keep it a secret. An organism that is so small it is virtually undetectable. An organism impervious to all known agents and biofilters. The applications are unlimited, especially for weapons. Emil, in all our years of service to the Federation, we have never made any personal gain. This is our last chance to retire wealthy men instead of penniless icons. What good is money, Milou?
Not much good in the Federation, but elsewhere you could live out your final years as a king. Think of it, Emil. You could have a harem of Orion slave girls, who would make you feel like a young man, or anything you wanted.
Milou, to whom would you sell the submicrobe information?
The Ferengi have already expressed an interest. There are factions within the Romulan Empire who would pay dearly. The Federation, with its open policies, would never be able to keep this discovery secret. It is best to profit now.
Emil Costa wrung his hands indecisively. I don't know.
Come now, Emil. I'll handle all the arrangements. And I'll make sure there is no danger to anyone. All you have to do is tell me the planet we were orbiting when you discovered the submicrobe. If Lynn hadn't been so thorough in her attack on your records, I might have been able to deduce it myself. The aged scientist shook his head decisively.
I'm glad she did it. Lynn was right. We can't sell out the Federation.
I've risked a lot for this deal, and I won't let you renege. Just tell me the name of the planet. Wesley sat on his haunches, so racked with anticipation that he didn't realize he was choking himself with a strip of gauze until the sudden intake of breath. Milou whirled around angrily. Who's there? Wesley rose to his feet sheepishly, but he felt a strong surge of pride for Dr. Costa. You're right, Doctor. Don't tell him anything. The doctor stared at Wesley, his mouth agape. What are you doing here, young man? How did you get in? Before Wesley knew what was happening, Karn Malou was dragging him toward pod number 1. Emil, open the pod. The doctor hesitated for a second. Then he sighed reluctantly and initiated the sequence, which opened the double-sealed hatch. Head bowed, the old man turned away. Wesley shouted, but the stocky Betazoid pinned his arms to his sides and stuffed him inside the airtight container. Wesley continued to shout and pounded on the smooth convex walls, but not even a whimper could be heard outside the Class 0 unit. With horror, he realized they could have easily killed him by programming the pod for a vacuum. But they had let him live, at least until the air ran out. Lieutenant Worf quickened his step as he approached the entrance to the clean room on Deck 31. He was still shaking his head over the cryptic message from O'Brien. Why in Kittimer was Wesley Crusher direct beaming to the pod room? And what was he doing without his communicator badge? The Klingon stopped at the voice-activated door. Worf, requesting entrance. Lieutenant Worf, not cleared for this facility. Security override, level 1. The door flashed open, and he was in the transition room, with its racks of white garments, neatly stacked helmets, showers, lockers, and changing stalls. Worf didn't know why, but the hackles on his back were rising in alert. He drew his phaser and made his way quickly toward the turbolift marked Micro-Contamination. Worf heard the racks of jumpsuits and coats rustling, but he was a split second too slow. The phaser beam ripped through his body like an electric charge, deadening nerve endings as it went, and Worf suppressed a howl. The wound was low on his thigh, and the charge didn't reach all the way to his brain. Worf dropped to the floor and tried to return fire, but most of his coordination was gone. A second beam struck him in the shoulder, and his head exploded in a single blast of pain, before everything went blank. Trapped inside the Class 0 pod, his air thinning to the point where standing in a crouch was making him dizzy, Wesley Crusher worked feverishly. He figured if he could rig a small experiment that would trip the monitoring equipment, maybe it would set off an alarm. If it didn't, he'd be the next experiment. He threw together the standard components, specimen receptacles, monitoring equipment, robotic shakers, and sterile tubing to make a particle detector. He removed the circuit board from a particle counter and set its switches manually to default to inorganic matter. That way, the slightest detection of organic matter would set it off. There were many ways he could have chosen to contaminate the experiment, but sometimes the simplest way is the best. Wesley summoned his concentration, took dead aim at the funnel, and spit. Slowly, he slumped to the floor of the pod, barely conscious. Through a haze, he thought he saw an apparition in white staring down at him through the tinted window of the pod, its slim fingers playing the controls. Suddenly, the pod door opened, and the Savior lifted Wesley out as if he were a baby, and held him for an instant. Wesley was coming to, heaving oxygen into his lungs. Ensign Crusher, are you in need of medical attention? Sadek, we have to act. Emil Costa sealed me in there. The Vulcan gently set Wesley down, his stoic expression never changing. Emil Costa is the only reason I am here. He asked me to check on an experiment for him, or else I wouldn't have been in this area. Are you certain you are well? Yes, we've got to stop them. One thing at a time, Ensign Crusher. There is a man outside this room who is either dead or badly wounded. What? Sadek motioned toward the door, and despite his dizziness, Wesley was the first one out. His first sight was a very live Klingon. Worf, however, was aiming a tricorder at a plump, white-suited figure sprawled on the floor. Wesley rushed to get a closer look, and instantly regretted it. The boy had to grab his mouth to keep from gagging. Most of the man's chest cavity had been burned to a blackened crater, and chunks of his white suit had melted around the jutting ribs. Worf looked up at the ensign. There is no rush to call sickbay.
This is the work of a phaser set on full. I was far luckier. My attacker had his phaser set to stun.
Wesley's mouth dropped open. You were shot too? Who is that? Worf knelt down beside the disfigured body and removed his helmet. Wesley gaped, and Sadek looked impassively at the familiar bristling eyebrows and shock of graying hair. The determined jaw was frozen in death. Worf's giant brow surged forward in anger.
Karn Maloo. Report, Ensign Crusher. What do you know about this?
Wesley gulped and related the conversation between Emil Costa and Karn Maloo, including their argument over the indestructible submicrobe. He told Worf about how they shut him inside the pod. As an afterthought, he added the fact that Emil Costa had been carrying a phaser.
Worf to computer. Report the whereabouts of Emil Costa.
Starbase at K-Run Rock. He transported 6.4 minutes ago.
Security Chief Worf to Starbase Security. Detain Dr. Emil Costa until I arrive. Use all caution. He is armed.
On the starbase, Lieutenant Worf dragged Emil Costa by the arm toward the containment cells. The scientist was beginning to struggle, and Worf tightened his grip and walked faster. I am innocent. I didn't kill anyone. Listen to me.
Interrogation will begin once you have been safely confined.
They passed a sentry, and Worf ushered the wizened scientist into one of the comfortably appointed cells.
Now, Dr. Costa, did you kill Karn Maloo?
No, I told you. When I left him, he was alive.
Why did you shoot me with a phaser weapon set to stun?
I don't know what you are talking about. Go away. The frail, white-haired old man curled up in the bunk, sobbing pathetically. He didn't seem at all like the kind of desperate lunatic who would willfully murder two people or betray the Federation. At least, thought Worf, they had a strong witness in Ensign Crusher. Karn Maloo had been hounding Lin and Emil for details of a discovery they were keeping secret, against Starfleet regulations. Emil could hardly deny complicity in that crime. Lin's destruction of the computer records now made perfect sense, and he couldn't forget Shauna Russell's testimony that she had heard Karn Maloo threaten Lin's life. At least the web of secrecy, deceit, and violence was beginning to make some sense. In the wrong hands, an undetectable and indestructible submicrobe would be the perfect weapon for sabotage and biological warfare.
Security log. Stardate 44263.2. Lieutenant Worf reporting. A hearing is set tomorrow at 10 o'clock to determine if Emil Costa should be bound over for trial on the murder of Karn Maloo. His accomplice, Grastow, has also been detained. The death of Lin Costa will not be pursued at this inquiry. There is still some doubt that she was murdered, or who the perpetrator might be. But there can be no doubt that Karn Maloo was murdered at close range by a phaser weapon set to full. Emil Costa had the weapon, the motive, and the opportunity. I can foresee no other verdict but guilty. However, there is the troubling aspect of why a man who had committed cold-blooded murder would reset his phaser to stun me. Why did he spare my life? And why did he alert Sadek to check on the experiment in the pod room, in effect saving Wesley Crusher's life? Perhaps this further proves that Karn Maloo was murdered for revenge, or perhaps it only shows that Emil Costa was far from rational. Since learning of the full involvement of Karn Maloo in these matters, I have asked Counselor Troy to investigate his personal records and effects. The habits of Betazoids can be somewhat eccentric, and she is more likely than anyone else to uncover more evidence.
'What are you doing? Asked Commander Troy. 'We're going to investigate his personal records and effects.' The habits of Betazoids can be somewhat eccentric, and she is more likely than anyone else to uncover more evidence. 'What are you doing? Asked Commander Troy. 'We're going to investigate his personal records and effects.' The habits of Betazoids can be somewhat eccentric, and she is more likely than anyone else to uncover more evidence. Deanna Troi felt like it should be over. The agonized death of Lynn Costa, the brutal murder of Karn Malou, the attacks on Worf and Wesley, and now the imprisonment of Emil Costa. It all sounded like the climax to a Victorian play, with the villain safely behind bars. Then why did she still feel an overpowering sense of dread? Somewhere she sensed the desire for revenge lurking beneath the veneer of everyday life aboard the Enterprise. She rounded the corridor leading to Karn Malou's office and bumped headlong into a figure hurrying in the opposite direction. Shauna Russell recoiled from her in shock. "I just heard, Counselor. I was working in the clean rooms, and the intercom in my helmet must not have been working. This is horrible. How can Dr. Malou be dead?" "Calm yourself, Shauna. This has been a shock to all of us. Did you think by going to Karn Malou's office you would find him?" "I don't know what I thought. I'm just so confused about everything. What is happening to us?" Deanna put her arm around the girl's shoulder and comforted her. "You must be brave. Emil Costa is standing trial for the murder of Karn Malou, and you will probably be called to testify, as I will." "But I don't know anything. What will I tell them?" "Just answer their questions, truthfully." "Thank you, Counselor. I think I will see who's in the 10 forward room. I don't feel like being alone." "I would join you, but I have work to do here." Leaving Shauna Russell, Counselor Troi walked down a corridor that was totally deserted. She wondered if Karn Malou's door would be locked. A bigger problem would likely be the volume of data he would have. Betazoids were inveterate record keepers, and they enjoyed the more arcane aspects of the practice. They seldom kept records only one way. His door whooshed open at her approach, meaning it had been left unlocked, or set to open automatically for anyone who approached. Deanna stopped abruptly. Malou's computer screen was on. Of course, thought Deanna, he may have gone off and left it that way. But Karn Malou didn't seem to be the careless type. Would he go off to a secretive meeting and leave his screen on and his door unlocked? She glanced back toward the door, a fleeting impression of Shauna Russell in her mind. The computer was already open to Karn Malou's file area. Deanna worked long into the night shift. The administrator's files on the people under his direction were complete, but oddly dry and impersonal. Nowhere was the opinionated flair of the man himself. The Betazoid pushed herself away from the immense desk. She stood and glanced about the room. Not that she expected to find a sheaf of yellowing papers lying on the floor, but it was not uncommon for a Betazoid to keep a secret diary or notebook. With the walls literally crawling with bugs, it wasn't an easy office to search. Deanna found herself distracted at every instant by a Regulan mantis or an Andorian silkworm. "Troi to LaForge. Are you busy, Geordi?" "Not particularly, Deanna. I just finished up an experiment for Worf. What did you have in mind?" "Can you come up to Karn Malou's office on Deck 5? I need a fresh pair of eyes." Commander Geordi LaForge scanned the room with the visor apparatus that augmented his sightless eyes. "Dead bugs don't give off electromagnetic impulses, do they?" "Not that I know of, Geordi." Geordi stopped before a dark wooden case that contained a dozen phosphorescent centipedes and carefully pried it open. As Deanna moved closer, his fingers reached hesitantly toward one particularly large and ugly specimen. The chief engineer wasn't careful enough, and the exotic insect crumbled to dust beneath his fingers. But underneath it, mounted to the board, was an isolinear optical chip. "Bingo!" "Thank you, Geordi. Let's see what's on it." Within seconds, Geordi had plugged the chip into a slot on Karn Malou's console, and Deanna was trying to access it from his keyboard. Their excited expressions turned to alarm as gibberish scrolled across the screen. "I'm sorry, Deanna. Something must have damaged the contents." No, it's not that. I've heard of this, but I have never seen it. It's a subliminal code. Code? Let's have the computer analyze it. You don't understand, Geordie. This isn't a code based on some mathematical or relational equation. It's distinctly betazoid, and it depends on subliminal thought patterns. Karn Malou himself did not know the code when he wrote it. Come again? It's like making a coded imprint of the contents of your subconscious. He wrote it while in a trance, knowing it would look like gibberish to him, too. But he knew he could read it in the future, if he concentrated. I think I know what you mean. On ancient Earth, people from certain religions used to speak in tongues and write in unknown languages, but they had no way to interpret what they had done. What do you want me to do with this chip? I am going to go back to my quarters and think about it, Geordie. This place is making me jumpy. In the sanctity of her darkened room, Deanna Troy drifted in and out of sleep. Her dreams were filled with the spirit of Karn Malou. His image, his face, his voice, his thoughts, and his coded writings fought for her subconscious. The code appeared to her like love letters, heartfelt attempts to communicate his secrets. Of course, they were love letters to himself, and she told herself she shouldn't read them. But she knew he wanted her to read them. She willed herself fully awake. Her closest comrades were on Kairon Rock at the hearing, and it was up to her to find more evidence to support Worf's case. What she needed was a beverage containing a stimulant. She picked up the isolinear optical chip, just because it felt comforting to hold it, and padded over to the food slot. Computer, I'd like a small pot of English tea. After several seconds, there was no synthesized voice response, and nothing happened at the delivery tray. Computer, may I have a glass of water? The complex mechanism hung in the wall like a shiny crater. It was dead. All right, I'll go down to 10 forward and get a pot of tea. Deanna hurriedly dressed and took only one thing with her: Karn Malou's secret isolinear chip. It was one of those overcast days, ruled by a good stiff breeze, the kind of day Deanna remembered so well from her youth. The meadow was alight with orange coal blossoms, no more than a few centimeters tall. The giant mellow reeds whipped in the breeze, their blue tassels hurling winged seeds into the wind, and the moss squished pleasantly under her boots. A drizzle struck her in the face, and she thankfully turned her face skyward to lick the rain with her tongue. She hugged her old shawl tighter around her shoulders and recalled how it had been knitted by a friend of her mother's. She wanted to feel like a child again, to rediscover the primitive emotions of childhood. Poetry, frivolity, the joy in taking a walk, these were the triggers that allowed a betazoid to access parts of the mind shut off to most species. She continued her stroll, marveling at the authenticity of the holodeck setting, and wondering what was over the next hill. Security Officer Carroll to Counselor Troy. The intrusion broke her mood, but only slightly. Troy here. An environmental technician is requesting entrance to your quarters to fix your food slot. My food slot? I didn't even report it. Please, let him in, and thank him for his prompt attention. The appointment can wait until you are present. No need for that. I may be here on the holodeck for some time. Out. One word Deanna told herself as she ran down a flowered hill, the wind slicking back her hair. One word, one name in Karn Malou's subliminal code might lead to others. Lynn Costa, she thought. The person who had started it all. She would look for Lynn Costa's name, and she would know it when she saw it. Somehow. Deanna twirled for a moment, her scarf billowing behind her as she chanted the nonsense words of a nursery song remembered from long ago. Aglow with exertion and the warmth of fond memories, she stopped spinning and stood perfectly still. End program. The room returned to a black segmented enclosure. Deanna toweled off and went back to her quarters, feeling refreshed and renewed. She knew she had the key. Deanna returned to her quarters and plugged the optical chip into her computer console. An odd melange of characters and symbols, apparently typed at random, crawled across the screen. She lightly perused the strange formations, waiting for something, anything, to jump out at her. Suddenly, small clumps of the alphabet soup made sense. Names and simple words leapt out at her. Excitedly, she paged through more screens, finding more names, all of them from the Micro-Contamination Project. Lynn, she repeated aloud as she typed, is the Queen Hag. Emil is a naughty jester. Sadek is the heir apparent. Grastow is a footman. Shauna is Jasmine. She stopped abruptly and peered again at the jumbled letters on the screen, and the words she had typed beside them. What did terms like footman, Jasmine, and jester mean? Was there another code underneath? She couldn't report to Worf, because he was on the starbase, enmeshed in the hearing. The computer would only allow an emergency message to reach him. Her head hurt, and she thought about getting some tea. Had Deanna not imagined a brimming cup of tea at that moment, she never would have seen the slight trail of steam spewing from the food slot. Damn, she muttered to herself. I thought they fixed that thing. She took a single step toward it and felt her legs buckle. Then every muscle deserted her, and she crumbled to the floor, gasping for breath. Blackness engulfed her senses, but she clung to consciousness for the split second it took to grip her insignia badge. Droid to sick bay. Emergency. Worf was surprised when Judge Watanabe put Emil Costa on the stand before the defense had presented its case. But he didn't object. He understood the judge's desire to comprehend the secret dealings between the deceased and the accused. With very little prodding, Emil Costa was eager to tell his story.
It was Vegra 2. That's the planet where I found the submicrobe. I trapped it myself while we were in the orbit and did all the preliminary tests myself. We knew it was special right away. Lynn and I immediately transferred the test data to our private file and started making only oblique references to it. All we knew was that we wanted to control the discovery until we had a clear goal for it. I ejected the only sample we had into space. No one but Lynn and I knew where to get more. We went to Karn Maloo for advice, and that was our biggest mistake. Crusher to Worf, emergency override.
Worf motioned to the judge.
Excuse me, Your Honor. Worf here. What is it, Doctor?
Report to sickbay at once. A few minutes ago, Deanna Troi nearly died. I want her to rest, but she insists on speaking to you.
Worf questioned Dr. Beverly Crusher at the sick bay entrance. Who brought her in? She called sick bay herself. The computer analyzed her voice patterns and deemed them sufficiently traumatized to initiate a direct beaming, or else we'd be attending another funeral. The Klingon snarled low in his throat, and the hair on the back of his neck tingled with anger. He followed Dr. Crusher into the intensive care unit. Deanna lay propped up in bed, not looking too ill except for her pale complexion and the wan smile she tried to give Worf. He noticed she was lying perfectly still, as if the slightest motion was too much of an ordeal at the moment. "I am sorry, Deanna. I put you in danger."
Nonsense. We are getting close now, and the guilty one is getting desperate. It's not Emil. In coded records, Khan Merlu wrote, Lin is the queen hag, Emil is a naughty jester, Sadok is the heir apparent, Grastow is a footman, and Shauna is Jasmine. That's just one entry in his notes. In my quarters there is an isolinear chip. We must have it.
Rest. You have done enough. Worf to security. Send a 4-man detail to Deanna Troy's quarters at once. Await my arrival.
Acknowledged.
Worf to LaForge.
Geordi here. How is Deanna?
As well as can be expected. Can you meet me at her quarters?
I sure can.
Bring a tricorder, Geordi. Out.
Geordi and Worf rounded a bulkhead to see the security detail standing outside the open doorway of Deanna Troy's cabin. Lieutenant Worf? The door was open when we got here.
At ease, Ensign. Remain on guard.
Geordi turned on his tricorder. Worf, I can find traces of toxic chemicals, but not in a quantity to be dangerous. It looks like somebody was nice enough to air out the room. The Klingon cautiously entered the room, knowing full well they were probably too late. He looked all over Deanna's desk and the computer console, but could find no sign of an isolinear chip. Geordi went to the blackened crater that had once been a food slot. Black streaks stretched like the fingers of a star from the gaping hole. Geordi kept his distance from the charred wires and steaming green goop. Direct shot. Somebody didn't want us inspecting this too closely. Worf's jaw tightened.
Somebody came in here to steal the isolinear chip. When they didn't find Deanna's body, they made a quick decision to destroy the evidence of their murder attempt. Commander, if you will handle the investigation from this end, there is something I must do.
By all means, Worf. Leave this mess to me. Worf strode angrily down the corridor, away from Deanna Troy's cabin. Again, the murderer had anticipated their actions and beaten them. Deanna Troy had found something, the first piece of evidence that hadn't been planted for them to find, like the blue vial. While he had been playing courtroom on Kran Rock, Deanna Troy had been doing his job. As he charged angrily down the corridor, he nearly knocked over the Vulcan, Sadok.
Pardon me, Dr. Sadok. I was preoccupied.
I heard about what happened to Counselor Troy. I thought I might be of some assistance.
Do these impressions mean anything to you? Lin is the queen hag. Emil is a naughty jester. Sadok is the heir apparent. Grastow is a footman. And Shauna is Jasmine.
Sadok blinked and furrowed his eyebrows slightly. In a monarchy, Lin would certainly be considered the queen. Emil was more capable of laughter and the human trait of joking than the rest of us, and one could say he has been naughty. I am the heir apparent to the micro-contamination project. As I understand the term footman, it could mean a servant. I leave it to you to say whether Grastow qualifies. As for Shauna being Jasmine, I did hear Dr. Merlu call her that once.
What? You say Jasmine is a name?
He used it as such. I only heard him call her that once, though. Worf rushed back to his command post and his computer console.
Computer, what is Shauna Russell's full background?
Shauna Russell, born Jasmine Terry on Earth, City of Calcutta. Age 25 standard years. Received Bachelor of Science degree.
Wait. When did she change her name?
8.5 months ago.
Correlate the name Terry with the records of Lynn and Emil Costa.
Searching. One match found. Megan Terry was a co-worker with the Costas approximately 26 years ago in the Dayton biofilter experiments. She sued them for scientific plagiarism over biofilter version 897-G, which was eventually accepted as the Federation standard.
Correlate Megan Terry and Jasmine Terry.
Mother and daughter. He heard a rustling behind him in the direction of the laboratory and turned to see Shauna Russell aiming a phaser directly at his head. That's enough of that. Raise your hands. This time my phaser is not set to stun.
Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance?
I liked you. Even I make mistakes. Now stand up slowly, keeping your hands up and back away from that console. Worf did exactly as he was told. He had dealt with dangerous creatures from all over the galaxy, but none of them were any more cold-heartedly ruthless than this small human female.
Your mother. She was the one who really perfected the biofilter.
Shauna's pretty face clouded with anger so ugly it bordered on dementia. It was worse than that. All three of them were equals in the project, but Emil was having an affair with my mother. He promised to leave his wife if she would turn over the results of her work to him. Like a fool, she believed him. They stole her work and got her reassigned, while they soared to acclaim. On top of that, my mother was pregnant. Emil is my father. Worf could envision a sad little girl who must have been harangued constantly about how the Costas had ruined her mother's life. As a Klingon orphan by the ravages of war, he understood the lure of revenge. He also understood its destructiveness.
You succeeded in destroying them.
Yes, I did. Killing Lynn was satisfying because of the complexity involved. But watching Emil suffer was so fulfilling. He had no idea who I was, or what was happening to him.
But Karn Malou knew who you were.
Of course. He knew my mother and her whole history with the Costas. When he wanted someone to spy on them over this business with the submicrobe, he came to my school to find me. We decided to change my name to hide my identity, and he spent his sabbatical teaching me Betazoid mind techniques to fool Deanna Troi. I've always been a good student.
Why did you kill him?
He was the only one who knew who I was. Plus, killing him resulted in even more suffering for Emil. How could I resist? I'm sorry about Chancellor Troi, but if she had died as planned, you wouldn't have known about the isolinear chip, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Let's go to the shuttle bay. So intent was Shauna's gaze on the tall Klingon that she didn't see the slim Vulcan standing just outside the doorway. Sadik gripped her neck for only a second, but it was enough to render her unconscious for several minutes. Worf let out a sigh.
Thank you again, Sadik.
I did not do it for your benefit, Lieutenant. We are terribly behind in the micro-contamination project, and we need to get Doctors Costa and Grastow back to work.
Security log. Supplemental. Lieutenant Worf reporting. Murder charges against Emil Costa were dropped after Shauna Russell's apprehension. Conspiracy charges could be leveled against the Doctor, but that seems unlikely given his long record of service to the Federation. Both Dr. Costa and Grastow have been remanded to Starfleet for counseling. If all goes well, they should be released in a few months.
The same cannot be said for Shauna Russell. Her psychoanalysis and treatment will probably take many years. The Microcontamination Project has been disbanded. Sadek has been assigned to other duties, namely heading a team dispatched to Vagra 2 in order to study the submicrobe firsthand. Counselor Troy is almost fully recovered, and she's been talking about cooking her own meals instead of using the food slot. It is alarming to think what might have happened to her. I remain deeply disturbed by these events. Like Shauna Russell, I have experienced the madness of revenge. Like the Costas, my own people practiced secrecy and deception until it nearly destroyed them. I can understand the motives of personal gain and ambition all too well. That is why the Federation is a free and open society. There will be no more secrecy about the submicrobe discovery. Sadek and his team will study it openly and share their knowledge. As the Costas learned to their regret, a terrible secret cannot be kept.